giving birth is more dangerous and more physically difficult for humans than for almost any other mammal on the planet. Watch almost any other large mammal give birth in the wild, and the pattern is strikingly consistent. Labor is often quick, the newborn is frequently up and moving within minutes or hours, and the mother is usually back on her feet and functioning again almost immediately. Human labor, by comparison, routinely stretches across many hours, sometimes more than a full day, involves a level of physical risk to the mother that stands out sharply even among our closest primate relatives, and produces a newborn that can't do much of anything for itself at all. That's a strange thing to sit with for a moment. Childbirth is about as fundamental to survival as anything gets. The one act every single one of your ancestors, without exception, had to successfully get through. So why would evolution leave something that important built so awkwardly, so painfully, and so riskily compared to how most other animals manage it? A researcher named Sherwood Washburn gave this problem a name back in 1960, and the name itself has stuck around in anthropology ever since: the obstetrical dilemma. His argument goes like this: at some point in human evolution, your ancestors became committed, full-time bipedal walkers, moving efficiently on 2 legs instead of 4. That shift required a narrower, more compact pelvis, reshaped specifically for efficient upright walking. At the same time, a completely separate evolutionary pressure was pushing in the opposite direction. Brains were getting dramatically bigger, generation after generation, and a bigger brain needs a bigger skull to fit through the exact same opening. 2 different evolutionary demands, walking efficiency and brain size, were quietly fighting over the size and shape of the same narrow passage. Neither pressure was willing to lose completely, and human childbirth is essentially what that unresolved standoff looks like in practice. Every human birth is, in a very real sense, an infant's skull negotiating its way through the tightest possible passage evolution was willing to allow, a passage that couldn't get any narrower without breaking bipedal walking, and couldn't get any wider without breaking the pelvis's other job entirely. That tight margin, repeated across every single human birth in history, is a big part of where the danger comes from in the first place. One proposed resolution to that standoff comes from a biologist named Adolf Portmann, and it's genuinely strange once you actually picture it. Portmann argued that human infants are born at a dramatically earlier stage of development than other primate babies. A newborn chimpanzee can grip its mother's fur and hang on almost immediately. A human newborn can't grip anything purposefully, can't hold its own head up, can't move under its own power at all, and won't be able to for months. Portmann's explanation is that if human pregnancy actually continued long enough for a baby's brain and body to reach that same relative stage of readiness other primates achieve at birth, the skull simply wouldn't fit through the pelvis anymore. So instead, birth happens early, on a kind of forced compromise schedule, and roughly another year's worth of development that other primates complete safely inside the womb gets pushed out into the world instead, completed slowly, vulnerably, entirely outside the mother's body. Portmann called this stretch the extra-uterine year, a human baby essentially finishing gestation in the open, held and carried and protected by other people instead of a womb. Compare that to almost any other mammal born on the savanna or the forest floor. A newborn gazelle can stand and stumble alongside its mother within the hour, because standing still in the open is a death sentence with predators nearby. A human infant left alone on open ground wouldn't survive the afternoon. That helplessness isn't a flaw slipped in by accident. It's the direct cost of buying just enough extra time for the skull to stay small enough to be born at all. That vulnerability connects to a third piece of the puzzle from a researcher named Trevathan. She focused on something specific about the mechanics of human birth itself, the twisted asymmetric shape the human pelvis has to have in order to satisfy both walking and birth at once forces the baby to rotate as it descends, and typically emerge facing away from the mother, not toward her. That single detail turns out to matter enormously. A mother giving birth alone can't easily reach down, clear the baby's airway, or guide the delivery herself, the way many other primate mothers routinely can when their infant is born facing them. Trevathan's argument is that this specific orientation is a major reason routine birth assistance became such a deeply, almost universally ingrained human practice. Not an occasional nicety, but something close to a biological necessity, baked directly into the mechanics of how a human baby's body has to turn on its way out. Think about what that actually implies. Somewhere back in deep prehistory, before any of the social structures modern humans take for granted existed, giving birth alone in the way most other mammals routinely do had already become a genuinely risky proposition for a human mother purely because of anatomy. Having someone else nearby, willing and able to help at exactly that moment, stopped being optional and started being something closer to a survival requirement for mother and infant both. It's worth being honest that this whole picture is still a genuinely active, unsettled area of research, not a fully solved case. More recent studies have pushed back on parts of it. Some researchers argue the obstetrical dilemma framing oversimplifies things, and that metabolic limits on how long a mother's body can sustain a pregnancy may matter just as much as pelvis width alone. And observations of chimpanzees and even bonobos giving birth have shown some of the same rotational movement and occasional companion support that used to be described as uniquely human, complicating the idea that assisted birth belongs to humans and humans only. The honest version of this story isn't scientists figured out exactly why, it's scientists are still actively arguing about the precise mix of causes, which, if anything, makes the underlying mystery more interesting, not less. It's also a useful reminder about how science on a topic like this actually works. A single tidy explanation proposed decades ago, even one as influential as Washburn's, doesn't get treated as untouchable simply because it came first. It gets tested, poked at, compared against new data from chimpanzee and bonobo births, revised, and sometimes partly overturned, which is exactly what should happen to a good scientific idea over 60 years. But whatever the exact combination of pressures turns out to be, the practical, lived result is not in dispute. Human childbirth really is unusually difficult and risky compared to nearly every other primate. Human infants really are born startlingly helpless, entirely dependent on other people from their very first moment outside the womb. And human birth really does seem to have relied on assistance, on another person present and helping, for a very, very long stretch of the species' history. That's worth sitting with for a second. Long before agriculture, long before written language, quite possibly stretching back further than complex spoken language itself. One of the oldest continuously repeated acts of human cooperation may simply be this: one person helping another person survive the exact moment a new human being first arrives. Every single person who has ever lived arrived into the world this way, through a passage built by two competing evolutionary demands that never fully resolved their argument, and very likely with someone else nearby doing whatever they could to help. Not a flaw in the design so much as evidence of exactly how much evolution was willing to compromise, generation after generation, just to keep both walking on two legs and thinking with a genuinely large brain possible for the same species at once.